Our keynote speaker is Dr. Lee Irwin. Lee Irwin is professor and chair of the Religious Studies Department at the College of Charleston. He is a scholar of world religions with an emphasis on Native American traditions, Western Esotericism, Hermeticism, contemporary spirituality, mystical cosmology, and transpersonal religious experience as related to dreams and visions. He is vice president of the Association for the Study of Esotericism and a board member of the Sophia Institute and Institute for Dream Studies. He has been a workshop leader and group facilitator for over 20 years, especially in the areas of visionary cosmology and the development of the sacred human. He is the author of many books and articles, including The Dream Seekers, Visionary Worlds, Awakening to Spirit on Life, Illumination, and Being, The Alchemy of Soul, and Coming Down from Above, Prophecy, Resistance, and Renewal in Native American Religions. It is my honor to introduce to you our keynote speaker for Hidden in Plain Sight, Dr. Lee Irwin.
Hello. Well, we're going to take a journey this morning, and I have to confess that I did not write a paper. I'm going to just do a lecture from notes because I started writing a paper and I got to page 23 and I was still on Plato. So I thought, okay, this isn't going to work. So here we go on a considerably long journey, and I hope you'll stick with me. I'll try to leave a little bit of time at the end for questions. So, our topic here is the history of reincarnation in Western tradition and Western culture, because the idea has often been that reincarnation is a theory that comes basically out of India and from the East, and yet there's actually a completely coherent history of reincarnation within Western esotericism, somewhat at the margin, but actually quite pervasive. So as I go along here, I'll try to show you how it kept coming back, how the theory keeps coming back and re-embodying itself in particular cultural context. There are a number of terminological concerns that in the Greek, which is going to be our primary reference here, we see that the real term that was used is metempsychosis, really, which means transformation of soul. And that term is used consistently all the way up into the 19th century. Right now, today, we think reincarnation, but actually reincarnation as a conceptual idea is really only introduced in the 19th century, primarily through Blavatsky and the Theosophical movement. So if you were to go back into, say, early 19th century, they'd still be using the term metempsychosis as a fundamental idea, the primary reference. There's other terms such as magismos sukan, which really means to pour or to transform the soul, and there's paleingenesia, which is the rebirth of the soul, the recreation. And in Latin, of course, it's transmigrare or transmigration. And and this is a term you might not be so familiar with, which is revolutione, which is revolution of the soul, by which they mean cycles of the soul. That's a very common term used after the 16th century. Of course, in Arabic, it's tanasuki. Actually, there's an I missing there. Tanasuki. And in Hindi, it's bhavasamtati, and in, of course, English, reincarnation. So there's a rich vocabulary, but we're going to basically stay focused on metempsychosis. Now, one of the first questions that really comes up about this issue is, where does it come from? What's the origin of the theory of reincarnation? And there's really no satisfactory answer to that in terms of the Western tradition, in terms of its earliest origins. The primary three sources are generally India, Egypt, and Greece. And of course, we know in India that by the 8th century, 800s BCE, that the Upanishads were being written. And of course, in the Upanishads, there's an explicit theory of bhavasamtati, or rebirth. So there's no question about it being in India back in the 8th century BC and having a continuous unbroken history in India and spread through Buddhism in the East. But was it transmitted from India into Greece, or did it go to the West? That's a very difficult question. There's a lot of debate and no satisfactory answer. So how about this? It originated in Egypt. Herodotus says in Book 2, quote, "The Egyptians are the first people to maintain that after death, the soul enters another creature at the moment of birth." That single passage, which is, by the way, the only reference in Herodotus, that single passage becomes the source text for all future claims about reincarnation originates in Egypt. And every Egyptologist that I've read and studied and know have all rejected that. They say, no, that's not true. And the argument is that the texts that are available, the texts written on the temple walls, right, and the coffin texts and the other texts that are available, such as the Egyptian Book of the Dead, which you've probably heard of, none of them mention reincarnation or metempsychosis of any sort. They actually mention a completely different idea, which is irtu hirpu, which means something like transfiguration. And what the theory there is that the soul of the individual, when it goes down into the duat, the underworld, undergoes judgment and transformation, and if it successfully passes through the 12 gates of the underworld, then it will be ascend. It will ascend. It will be transformed and ascend, which means what? Up to the boat of Ra, to ride through the heavens and be into the heavenly level. And there's no coming back from that. That's going on into the higher realm. So, no reincarnation. And yet we're going to find out that the reference to the origin of the idea keeps being referenced back to that single text in Herodotus. Now, before I leave that, I want to offer a counter theory, which is also out there and somewhat popular, and this is this theory that this is a perhaps, okay? Perhaps the reason that reincarnation is not mentioned in these texts is because these are elite texts. They're texts that were for the elite who were going to, have the highest reward, and the highest reward was to ascend to the highest heaven. And that reincarnation could easily have been the popular fate, so to speak, of the ordinary person. They just reincarnated and came back over and over until they got to a position where they could become part of the elite, and then there was no coming back. So it's possible that at the folk level, there was actually a theory in Egypt that wasn't even mentioned in the text. It was so commonplace, so ordinary, that it wasn't even put into the text. So that's a speculative theory because it's not in the text. So there's some scholars who feel that's the reason. However, there's another source that we can turn to in terms of the origin of the theory, and that would be real human experience. I'm presenting the idea of reincarnation as a viable theory of post-mortem life. I'm saying that human beings make claims that they remember their past lives, that they have participatory knowledge of past life experience. So one primary source is not simply the text or the traditional history, but the actual experience of real human beings. So how many people in this room think, just on your own here, that reincarnation is a viable theory for rebirth and human